the philosophers and try to do some research. That is philosophical research. Historical research, you can do some, you know that people are doing historical research. You have documentary analysis, you study the past, and you also study the testimony, that is the oral testimony of the people. So in this, you will have the documentary examples will be documentary analysis, study of the past, and oral testimony. Descriptive research consists of both quantitative and qualitative research. Qualitative method includes, you will have case studies, you have naturalistic observation, surveys, you can have the archival research, longitudinal and cross-sectional research also. Of course, in experimental research also, you can do some descriptives, describe that is concerned with the present status. You try to do some survey and try to find out the relationship between the variables. Say, for example, if you have study habits and your academic achievement, you try to find the relationship between the study habits and academic achievement. That is by constructing a questionnaire on the study habits, that is called a survey. After giving the survey, after giving the questionnaire to the a sample, you try to collect the data, analyze the data, and do some descriptive analysis. Descriptive analysis includes fact findings. You try with the mean and the standard deviation, you're trying to describe about the sample. That is descriptive research. Okay, then you have experimental research. You know, the experimental research design consists of, it can predict, it can give you the cause effect relationship. Predictive research, it can have the impact study. Like you have a picture here, you just discuss about how do they do experiments. In science, they do experiment in labs and things like that. But in education, how you can do by finding out the cause effect relationship. That is an experimental research design. Okay, where you can have, in this experimental research, you can have longitudinal research, you can have cross-sectional research, you can have genetic research, case studies, clinical research. All this come under experimental type of research design. And you have developmental research design. You know Piaget's stages of development, how he has been developed, studying the stages of any child from 0 to 3 months, and how it has developed and how it has grown, etc. It is a developmental research. All this research you do in education. And what is an experiment? Experimental research consists of both independent variable and dependent variable, and you would like to find the cause and effect relationship between the independent and the dependent variable. The independent variable is nothing but the manipulated variable, and the dependent variable, you try to find the effect by studying the independent variable. And this experiment allows the causal relationship among the variables. That is very, very important. Okay, you want to study the cause and effect relationship in the experimental research design. So the classical experimental design has these things. What are they? There are 3 pairs of components. Already I explained to you all this. You will have independent and dependent variables in the experimental research design, where independent, IV is independent variable is manipulated, and dependent variable is observed for change. For example, if you have two set of students, groups of students, namely class A, class B. Class A, you make it as the group, experimental group. Class B, you make it as the control group. For class A, what you are going to do, suppose you are finding the effectiveness of teaching methodology. For class A, what you do, you give treatment. Treatment is manipulation. Treatment in the sense, you try to give some methodologies like PowerPoint presentation, so flipped classroom, blended classroom learning. Like that, you try to give some methodology for introducing any of the concept. Whereas for the dependent for the control group, you don't give any treatment. You just lecture them. So you try to find the effect between the experimental group and the control group. You will have 2 groups. Always for an experiment, you have 2 groups. One group is experimental group. The other group is the control group. Okay, so the experimental group, you give treatment. Treatment here is teaching methodology. The number of teaching methodology you can vary for introducing a concept. And for the the control group, what you do is you don't give any methodology, just plainly lecture them. So you want to find the teaching effectiveness of these two groups. So when you give different methodologies, whether class A performs much better than class B. Class B is a control group. Class A is a group, experimental group. So the teaching methodology, which varies, is an independent variable. The methods is an independent variable, and teaching effectiveness is a dependent variable. That is what we are trying to understand. So for any experiment, you have three pairs of components. Okay, and you will also have the classical experimental design has pre-testing and post-testing. You can have before you give experimental treatment, what you can do is you can give them a test, okay, for any group. So that is called as pre-test. After experimentation, you can give again a test to find out the teaching effectiveness. So pre-testing and post-testing happens here. And you have the experimental and control groups for any experimental research design. So experimental group receives the treatment and it is compared with the control group. Control group, you don't give any treatment. That is what we try to understand. So this experimental research design is a traditional type of research. You want to find the cause-effect relationship among the variables. You have experimental group versus control groups. Each group of participants receives a different treatment. I told you, if you have, for example, class A and class B, they will have different treatments. It is not only with the two groups, you are going to learn about the types of research design. We will have different groups and different treatments. Okay. And it is always involves manipulation of the independent variables. Only independent variable will have manipulation. It is otherwise called as treatment. Okay, manipulation, or you give treatment to the experimental group. So the research will the research question will be, what will be after giving treatment, what will be the effect of the experimental group as well as the control group. Okay, so the next is, I have short slides only so that it is easy for us to understand. What are the variables? 1 minute. What are the variables that are involved in experimental research design? We are supposed to know what are the variables that we are associated with when we talk about research, especially for experimental research. Okay, so already we know that the independent variable and dependent variable are there for experimental research, right? We have the independent variable, it is always otherwise called as experimental variable. Okay, independent variable, otherwise called as experimental variable. And we have the dependent variable, it is also called as criterion variable. If you could read a lot of the other books, like you have John W. Best, you read Kothari, or you read Sharma Bharati, or you read LRK, otherwise you read Curlinger, you have lot of, I have sent Lindquist, all these people will be talking, will be discussing about experimental research, and the variable, they name in different way, but it is nothing but they use different terminologies when they talk about independent variable and dependent variable. Thus, you need to understand. So dependent variable is otherwise called as criterion variable. Independent variable is otherwise called an experimental variable. In between these two, we have an intervening variable. I have given lots of examples for intervening variable. It is otherwise called as confounding variable. All this we are supposed to understand. Okay, confounding variable. And you also have a control variable when you when you discuss about the experimental research design. And what are they? Okay, so first we'll understand what is an intervening variable or confounding variable. Intervening or confounding variable. So I told you For any research, you have experimental research, we have independent variable and a dependent variable. You have a third variable which is called as confounding variable or intervening variable. That variable will affect the relationship between the two variables, independent variable and dependent variable. Say teaching effectiveness between class A and class B. You have teaching effect, you have the teaching styles, and you are trying to find the effectiveness. You are giving blended learning for class A. In between, some other confounding variable acts. Say for example, the classroom climate. We are not considering about the classroom climate. Okay, so we have such other variables which affects the experimental group. So confounding variable is a variable that affects the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. Okay, other than the independent and dependent variable, when you do experiments, there are other types of variables. One such variable is a confounding variable or an intervening variable. See, this manipulated variable is a independent variable. It is otherwise called as active variable, and measured variables may be called as attribute variables. Okay, so I am just giving you the different names of the independent and the dependent variables, and which are the other variables that act in between the experimental research. That's it, girls. So example of attribute variable is intelligence. For teaching effectiveness, we are not including intelligence, aptitude, sex, SES, socioeconomic status, and the achievement, need for achievement, etc. These variables you will be measuring. Like I told you, study habits and teaching effectiveness. In between, this intelligence you can take it as a confounding variables also. Otherwise, it is an attribute variable. When you do any experiment, you can measure these variables. So such variables are called as attribute variables. Okay, attribute variables can also become the active variables. Active variables are otherwise called as manipulated variables. Manipulated variables are otherwise called as independent variables. All this you need to understand. And we know the independent variable is a variable that is believed to cause change in the other variables. For example, I told you teaching methodology for two groups we are taking. Teaching methodology, if you are going to change, automatically it affects the groups. Okay, so independent variable is a variable that causes changes in the other variables, and dependent variable, the variable that is changed by the independent variable. The teaching effectiveness, for example. Okay, that is the dependent variable. And what are intervening variables? Intervening variables are the variables that affect between the independent variable and the dependent variable. Okay, we have, suppose for example, I have given lots of examples here. So suppose poverty. Think about poverty. Poverty, due to poverty, the life of any individual is short. That is what I have given it as shorter longevity. So lack of, in between intervening variables, lack of access to health care. Due to poverty, a person is not able to access the health care, thereby he dies. Okay, so poverty is the independent variable. Here we have the intervening variable is nothing but, I have introduced intervening variable in between. Just go about it. See, in the previous slides, we were talking about active and attribute variables. Intervening variable is otherwise called as confounding variable. So, for example, if you take poverty and the lifespan, in between we have access, lack of access to the health care as a confounding variable, or it is otherwise called as what? Intervening variable. Okay, so I have some more examples for you. Perceived stress and quality of life. If you have more stress, there is stress for you to sit to the class from 7 to 8 for research methodology. So stress is there, and your quality of life is affected, home life is affected there. Okay, so that is an outcome variable. I am introducing again the other terminology for independent variable. Independent variable is otherwise called as antecedent variable, and dependent variable is otherwise called as outcome variable. Independent variable is otherwise called as income variable. Input variable, and quality of life or outcome variable is the dependent variable. Okay. In between, we have I am again introducing a terminology, mediator variable. This variable you call it as the confounding or the intervening variable, which is satisfaction with social support. Okay. If you have support in the family, you can listen to my class. Okay. So otherwise you will have stress. Your stress increases if there is no support in the family for you to listen to your class. Thereby your quality of life is affected. Okay. Research is very interesting when you relate with your day-to-day life. Okay. So you have socio-economic status. How your socio-economic status is, the according to your socio-economic status, your child will read nicely. If you have the socio-economic status includes your income, your background, your occupation, etc. According to your income and occupation, your education, your parental education levels, the reading ability of your child is improved. So in between these independent and dependent variable, you have a mediator variable where it is nothing but your parental educational levels. It acts whenever a child wants to get first rank, and if you are as a family member, if as a mother, if you are going to help her out very nicely, she is going to get the marks to be higher, her rank is going to stand higher, or she is going to come up well in her life. So it all depends on the parental education levels. So it is a mediator variable. Okay. See here, intervening variable or the confounding variable is nothing but income. When you see about the level of education, income is the confounding variable, your spending. So spending becomes the dependent variable. Like this, you have lot of, already I told you, due to poverty, life expectancy is less. In between, poverty is the independent variable and this is a dependent variable. In between, you have lack of access to health care. So uh, likewise, you have other examples. Effect of For determining the effect of use of audiovisual aids on learning ability of farmers in a village. So the association between audiovisual aids and learning ability needs to be explained. How other variables intervene. Anxiety, motivation. Suppose farmers in a village, they'll have anxiety because audiovisual aids you are going to give for them. So higher education, here education is the independent variable. Higher income, as and when they are able to educate higher, they get higher income. So better occupation is the intervening variable. Likewise, you can give many examples for this independent, dependent variable and intervening variable. I have given more variables for examples. Hours of study, you increase your hours of study, your exam score is more. So exam score is the dependent variable. It is depending on the hours of study, and how much times you practice, how much time you do your research readings, educational research reading, your exam score will be more. That's it. So which is the independent variable? The time you allot for your hours of study for research, educational research, and the more you practice, you will be able to get more score. So hours of study is the independent variable, exam score is the dependent variable, and mediator variable or confounding on intervening variable is nothing but number of practice of the problems you completed. That is for any. I will skip this. I will skip this also. So defining independent variable and dependent variable. Independent variables, these are the terminologies, different terminologies that is used by different authors. Okay. So for independent variable, it is also a presumed cause variable. It is a stimulus variable. It is an antecedent variable, otherwise called as manipulated variable, treatment variable, or input variable. Already I told you in my uh, explanation that these three things like antecedent, manipulated, it is also called as treatment variable. All this you try to understand. And dependent variable is presumed effect. Okay, cause and effect relationship you want to find out between the independent and the dependent variable. So it is a cause, independent variable, effect is dependent variable. Response, whenever you give a stimulus, you have a response. Okay, and you have the consequence. When you have a reason, you have the consequence also. And manipulated, you have the outcome. Result, treatment, you get the result. When you give an input, you get an output. So these are the other terminologies for the dependent variable. Okay, so what is a control variable? Control variable are otherwise called as extraneous variables, possibly affecting the experiment. Okay, that are kept constant so as to minimize their effects on the outcome. You had independent variable and dependent variable. Independent variable, you gave treatment, teaching methods you gave. But for the control group, you were controlling, you were just giving the lecture. So you are trying to control that group with the control variable. So they are called as control variables. They are otherwise called as extraneous variables also. I am trying to introduce to you, whenever you have experimental research design, what are the variables that you have to know as and when you do your experiment. Okay, so intervening variables already we studied. Intervening variables are nothing but your confounding variables, are hypothetical internal states that are used to explain the relationship between the observed variable, such as independent. These variables, independent variables and dependent variables, are called as independent observed variables. Any research when you do, you need to observe the subject, and you have to write the results that is expected as a as a researcher. Okay, so dependent variable, criterion variable by which the results of the experiment are judged. You have variable that is expected to be dependent on the manipulation of the independent variable. You can have all these definitions, girls. Any variable that can be manipulated is an independent variable, manipulated, or it can be altered, or it can be and it can be independently of any other variable, is an independent variable, and it is hypothesis to be the causal influence. That's very, very important when you have to do your experimental research. When you do your experimental research, you have to know about all these terminologies. Experimental treatments, you give manipulations are nothing but your treatments. Okay, and you have the experimental group and the control group in any experimental research design. And you also called as the test unit. It is the entity whose responses to experimental treatments are being observed and measured. Whenever you have two groups, class A and class B, you try to give them pre-test and post-test, and you try to measure their effectiveness through the test unit. Okay, randomization, you try to assign some assign the groups, a control group and the experimental group. Randomly you try to take the subjects are nothing but the students here, the sample. Okay, in the sample you have the subjects. Assignment of subjects and placements to groups is based on chance provided by control by chance. Randomization, we have some more methods which I will be doing it in the future classes. Okay, so random assignments allows the assumption of the groups are identical. How you have to make identical, how you have to select the group, all depends on certain conditions which I will be taking in the next classes. Okay, and you have also have some bias or the constant error. Error occurs whenever you do your research, that you have to understand. You will either have a systematic error, or you will have a sampling error, or you will have an experimental error. All these errors, every now and then I'll be when I take statistics, I'll be talking about the sampling error, statistical error, like that. Here in experimental research design, you talk about constant error. Okay, since we are doing research with with the human beings, automatically you will have errors, you will come across errors, and how we are going to reduce those errors which are systematic or constant errors. All these terminologies you may have to know. I'll be dealing it in further future classes. Okay, and extraneous variables already we have discussed. Variables other than the manipulated variables that affect the results of the study, and will they potentially invalidate the results? All those we are yet to study. Okay, How will you control the extraneous variable? Either you can remove the variable, you can do a randomization, you can match the cases, you can balance the cases, or you can go for UNCOVA. UNCOVA is nothing but analysis of covariance. All this again will be dealing. So what you have studied, you have discussed about the independent variable, you have discussed about the dependent variable, we have discussed about the extraneous variables. Also, we have discussed about the variable which is confounding or intervening variables. Okay. And the next is, 1 minute. Next is your research design. Okay. What is meant by research design? All this, I think I am repeating. I do not know. There was no continuity. I am trying to repeat it and going fast also. What is a research design? It's a master plan. It gives you the methods and procedures for collecting and analyzing the data in a research. Okay. So a research design is a master plan. You plan for doing your, I'm just talking about only the experimental research design. You have to plan and you have to have a blueprint of the research of what you are going to do, how we are going to have the experimental group, how we are going to have the control group. That is a master plan. The design of study, the investigator's plan of action is nothing but your research design. You in research design, you will have research questions, you will frame the objectives, you will frame the hypothesis, you will have the research questions, and you will just think about how you are going to go about with the research. Kerlinger is a statistician, and he has a beautiful book to explain what is meant by research design. It is a plan, structure, and strategy of investigation conceived so as to obtain answers to research questions. So naturally, anyone who's doing research will have the research question supposed to have, and you have to come out with research questions that is there. The plan is the overall scheme of research, how we are going to do research. I told you, research is a scientific method. It follows certain steps like identifying the problem, collecting the review literature, analyzing the review literature, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and coming to conclusion with statistical analysis. It is the overall scheme of research. Likewise, John W. Best also provides a systematic, he says that research design is a systematic plan of procedure for a researcher to follow. That is what we are trying to understand. It is nothing but a logical and systematic plan that you need to understand. It is a logical. You have to have some reasoning. Why you are doing, how we are doing, what you are going to do. All these plans you should plan it before you are doing your research. So it is a logical and systematic plan of research. Okay, and it will have several steps, as I told you already. You will have a detailed plan of action, and you will have the goals of how you can achieve the goals of research also you can think about. Okay, and you also have to minimize the possible errors by maximizing the validity and the reliability of the data. Okay, this is what you say as a research design. Why you need a research design? You want the research to be fruitful, you want to make use of all the resources available, you want to bring out the deficiencies, whatever in between distractions happen, don't want to happen all those. That is why you have a proposed plan of action. You determine the type of resources. Anybody who's doing a research will think about time, money, and manpower, etc. You have to design a research in such a way that you have to, whether you can do it correctly, whether you'll be possible to do it, whether you have the resources to do it, whether you have the manpower to do it, etc. They will think about the researcher, whoever is designing for a proper research. And you have to prepare in advance, and you have to ascertain whether the course of action is planned in conformity with the objectives of the study. So first of all, you have to have an objective. Only then you will be able to hypothesize, you will be able to frame the research questions, and you will be able to come to the action, and you will come out with the goal of research. Okay, so what are the characteristics of a good research design? You try to plan the plan, you try to outline, you take a blueprint, and you have a schematic representation of the research design. That's why we ask the researchers to give a schematic representation of the research design that is they are going to follow. Okay. So how do you prepare the research design? You just question yourself, what is the study about? Why is the study made? What is the scope of the study? What are the objectives of the study? What are the propositions to be tested? Propositions are nothing but your hypothesis that you are going to frame. Already for survey, you have framed the hypothesis, I think so. And what are the major concepts that is defined operationally? Operationally, for your research, we have operational definition in research that is very, very important, which is misunderstood by all the researchers almost. Just try to find out what is operational definition in research. Okay. So based on what criteria are the measurement, your operational definitions can be made. And what and when will be the study be conducted, and what is the time period, that is very important. And you have to know the design of research also. Okay. What are the kinds of data needed? All these are your questions before you do your research. What are the sources of data, and from which population is otherwise called as universe, from which universe you are trying to pick out the sample, and what is the sample size, and what is the sampling technique you are going to follow, and what are the methods to be adopted while doing the data, collecting the data, and what are the tools that are available for the data, and how we are going to process the data. It is through the statistical analysis. And what are the techniques to be allowed for analysis of data. All these are the units which we are doing in your research. Okay, how the data is processed, what are the techniques of analysis, and what is the significance of the study. For each of the question I have given here, you have concepts behind it which you have to study for your research. Otherwise you will not be able to write your thesis. Okay. So, and who are the target audience you are going to report the findings. Always you have to keep in mind your research and who are the audience you are trying to expose your results. Okay. Only then, if you ask all these questions only, you'll be able to do a very good research. Okay. And what is the type of report that is to be prepared, and what is the time period required for each stages of research? That is very, very important. Okay. Each stages of research is identifying the problem, how much time you are going to collecting the review, how we are going to being MS, we didn't allow you to give, we didn't allow time for you, but always you have to plan your research. You have to have a time period to do each step. Okay. And what is the time limit within which the whole work to be completed, and what is the cost involved? These are the questions you really have to ask when you have a research design, when you plan to do research and you have a research design. Okay. Research can be made in the scientific basis. Educational research is a scientific research. Only thing is you are doing with the human beings. When you have a research design like this, you can avoid the wastage of time, and you can when you plan, even money can be minimized. You can have the optimum reliability and validity, and you can give useful conclusions. Okay. That is how you go with the research design. Next is 1 minute, girls. We are dealing with what are the types of research designs that are available for you. The types of research design. One is exploratory research design. We have a descriptive research design. We have experimental research design as your first unit. And we also have ex post facto research design. Apart from this, you have other designs. I have given only these types of research design to understand. Okay. Exploratory research design, you try to explore, you have a sample, trying to find out the ideas from the sample which you are doing. Okay. All this will be dealt in. Descriptive research, which are the research designs that will come under all these types of research we are going to talk about right now, discuss. Okay. So what is exploratory research? You will have an unfamiliar problem and you will try to explore from that problem. For example, you have case study. Okay, you have number of students in your class. They have come in the beginning of the year. You have some students who are unfamiliar for you. You want to find out how the students are, how what is their family background, whether their parents have studied, whether they can do well in their studies, what is their family background, what is their environmental background, from where they are. All these are your exploration. So you have unfamiliar students, you try to explore about those students. That is an exploratory research. Like this, we can go on, give examples. Okay. So that exploratory research gives you ideas. From there you can make some suggestions, etc. And from the exploratory research you can generate problems. For example, you have students who have joined newly. You can generate some problems from them. Problems in the sense, you have a set of students where one is hyperactive, one is problematic, one is studying excellent student. Like that, you have the variety of students. From there only you generate research, you generate research questions, you generate problems. From the generation of the problems you can do research. So all of your teachers, if you want to go for higher research, you try to think about your own classroom and try to bring about research problems in your own class itself. You can try and bring some problems, and you can identify certain research problems, and you can find out some solutions. That is why we always say teacher is a researcher. Teacher in our classroom, all the time she'll be doing some research. She's trying to find about the unfamiliar problems that is happening inside the classroom. That is why we have a type of research which is called as action research, where you do some action for the classroom and try to solve some problems. Okay. And initiation into the inquiry, you try to find what etc inside the classroom. I am giving only classroom example for exploratory research. What is the purpose of doing exploratory research? You can generate new ideas, you can identify problems, increase familiarity with the problem. You think about your own class students. Okay. You can find out the size of the data, you can plan for field work, you can make clear concepts, and you can recognize the feasibility of research. Next is descriptive research. 1 minute, girls. Next is descriptive research. Mostly survey research we are doing. We can also do interrelationship the studies. We can also do developmental studies. All these are, I told you what is developmental study research. Studies, otherwise called as descriptive research also. In certain books, they will write studies only. Okay, it is research. And surveys research, you want to, survey because you are all doing survey only. Okay, I'll skip this. Survey is a critical inspection to provide exact interpretation. You want to study about an area or a sample with respect to certain conditions, and you want to do some social survey. It is a process of quantitative research. Survey is a quantitative research because you will give a questionnaire and try to find the data, collect the data, and analyze the data through statistics. That is why it is called a quantitative research. Okay. What are the characteristics of the survey research? It is a normative study. You have a large number of cases. You say no, we say collect 300, collect 500. 300, 500 is not okay if you have to compare with the universe. Okay. At a particular point of time, you can do it. You have a definite purpose and you have objectives. You can carefully analyze. You will have a logical and skillful drawing of inferences. You have an organized body of knowledge. You try to explain and solve the current problem. All this you will be practically doing, girls. And experimental research design, already I told you, it is, you have independent and dependent variable, and you have cause effect relationship between the independent and the dependent variable. Experimental design you can do in labs, you can do in classrooms, you can do in clinical. Mostly in medicals we do experimental research. hospitals we do, in the farms and fields we do experimental research design. And we also know that you can control, you have a experimental group and control group. You can control the control group and you can predict whatever, you can predict the result. Okay. And experimental research design is a blueprint, where you try to have some hypothesis and come to conclusions about the relationship between the independent and the dependent variables. Okay. So experimental research design, you have the different types, girls. We have true experiment, lab and field you can do, true experimental research design, pre-experimental research design, quasi-experimental research design, and you have ex post facto research design. Non-experimental research designs are historical research, descriptive research, surveyed research, case studies, ethnography. These are all called as qualitative research design. This is quantitative research design. Okay. Of course, both qualitative and quantitative will come for experimental and non-experimental. Whenever data is involved and whenever statistics is involved, it is quantitative research design. Okay. You have ethnography, you have field studies, content analysis. You have, I have to make it as etc. You have other types of researches which I am not given in the syllabus for you. Okay. So you, for experimental, you identify and define the problem, you formulate the objectives and hypothesis, you construct an experiment, including all the subjects, you conduct the experiment, you compile the data and apply the statistical analysis and test the significance. All this will be dealing what is meant by test of significance. Okay. So ex post facto research design, already it's empirical investigation which the investigator inference regarding the relationship between the variables on the basis of such independent variables whose manipulation has already occurred. For this, I can give an example. Some accident has happened and the police comes and does some investigation. Okay. So it is an ex post facto research design. Already occurred incidents, for already occurring incidences, you are trying to investigate. Such designs are called as ex post facto research design. What are the characteristics of ex post facto research design? Effect is independent variable, dependent variable and probable. What is the cause you are trying to find out? It is an independent variable. You form a theory, you will from a theory you will theory will be drawn after finding out what are the causes. Okay. So what you do, think about an accident. Accident has occurred, you are trying to you are trying to find out why, how. Okay. That is the theory. Okay. So you form a theory from the incident that has happened and search in retrospect causal comparison. You try to without any intervention. For manipulation, other word is intervention. Okay. Without any intervention, you are trying to do some research. And investigator has no direct control over the variable. We are not involved with the variable. Okay. So, and you also have, you refer to experts. Think about accident itself. How the accident happened, you try to find out from the surroundings, environment, etc. Okay. So refer to experts only. You're not directly dealing with. Whereas an other experimental research design, you give a manipulation for the class A and class B. That is the example I told you for experimental research design. It is a popular method in social and education and intervention studies. Ex post facto research design is popular method. You have different types of ex post facto research design. Correlational design, criterion group design, reference group design, comparative group design. Only the name, from the name you can really find out what is correlational, criterion, reference, and all these are not in your syllabus. But types of ex post facto research design is important. That's why I wrote this. Okay. Can I go for one more slide presentation and finish with it? With that, your types of research design will be over. Yes, girls, tell me. Anyone can tell me whether we can go in for the next. Yes.
Okay, ma'am.
So types of experimental research designs. We have experimental research designs. It's divided like this because we are not going to talk about in detail with the statistical research designs. I don't even ask the MPhil research scholars to do this statistical research design. If you're going to learn, it is well and good. Otherwise, you try to understand uh, what are the types of experimental research design. We have pre-experimental research design, true experimental research design, quasi experimental research design, and statistical research design. Pre experimental research design is, you have the types to be one shot study, one group pre test post test design, and static group comparison design. Okay, one by one, I am trying to explain. It is very simple, girls. Once you understand, don't get worried about what is all this. You have so many things to study. It is not so. You try to understand what is what. With a simple example, I am trying to explain to you what are the types that are available for you. True experimental research design, in this you have three types: pre-test, post-test with control, post-test only with control, and Solomon four-group design. And quasi-experimental research design, you have non-randomized control group design, time series design, and multiple series design. And in statistical, you have completely randomized block design, Latin square design, and factorial design. See, I just want to tell you, survey is not only the research that you can do. You can always do these types of research for your PhD, higher education. Okay, if you are going to do higher education, you can do any type, one type of research here. Hmm? I would just like to tell you that one of my research scholar did true experimental research design. In that, she did Solomon four group design, and the thesis is available in the library. You can go through it. Okay, so not doing only survey is not research. You have to go in for such designs, and you have to do. And with the classroom itself, you can adopt these designs. Such many designs are there for you to do your research. That is what I would like to tell you. Okay, what is pre-experimental research design? We just spoke about pre-experimental research design. It has got three groups. So what is pre-experimental research design? It will not have any control groups. Any experimental research design has one experimental group and one control group. Okay, so that is the common understanding. Now we have a pre-experimental research design which doesn't have any control groups. You cannot, when you don't have any control groups, you cannot establish any causal relationship. Okay, experimental research design has cause-effect relationship. You cannot find out any causal relationship. It is not considered as experimental design. Such a design, you call it as the pre-experimental research design. How, for example, one short case study, you have an experimental group, you give a treatment, you give post test, you select a group, treatment is given, and the post test is conducted. That is one short case study. For example, you select a course to a class. You think about your own classroom, girls. You have a set of students, 40 students. So you select a course to a class, teach them calculus, and at the end of the course, conduct a test on their awareness of the knowledge of the effects of calculus. That's it. Okay, it is called as one short case study. You have a class, you don't have any control group here. That is the condition for pre-experimental research design. Pre-experimental research design, you don't have any control group, you cannot establish causal relationship. It is not considered as a experimental research design, but it is one of the examples. One short case study, you have a class, you give treatment, calculus is taken for them, and you give a test for them. So just as you go for the class and take class and give them test, is one short case study. That's it. Okay, it's very simple if you to understand. So one short case study, you are not sure of the awareness of the students is due to the course given. You're not sure whether the marks given by the students, marks taken by the students is because you have given the awareness about calculus or awareness about some other concepts. Okay, so they would have studied even earlier before you take class. That is the case in one short case study. The measure in the independent variable cannot be attributed to the influence of the independent variable. That's what I told you. It is the poor model. Don't choose this model. It is a poor model in the educational group. So next is, I'll switch over to this. Next is one group pre-post design. What is one group pre-post design? A pre-test is given for an experimental group and the treatment, and again post-test is given. It is one group. By the name itself you will understand, you needn't have to worry that these are there. Okay, you have one group, you give pre-test, post-test again after the treatment. That is why it is called one group. Listen here, one group pre-post design. What is the one group? You have only experimental group, that is pre-experimental group. You don't have any control group, you have only one group experimental group. You give pre-test, you also give post-test. Okay, after treatment. So you can write your own examples here afterwards. Conduct a pre-test in statistics to a class, teach them statistics, and at the end of the course conduct the test on their awareness of knowledge of the effects of statistics. That's it, girls. You can do your research design, you can have your own treatment. The treatment can vary. I have given only about statistics or calculus or like that. You can have your own treatment and do your one group pre-post design. But remember, pre-experimental design is a poor design. Okay. Next is, what are the advantages and disadvantages? It is a simple methodology. It can be adapted in the classroom. It provides stimulus for better classroom teaching. And disadvantages, there is a carryover effect. Just find out, you just Google and find out what is carryover effect. And learning speed, some of the things I will skip because for the want of the time. Learning speed cannot be assumed to be same at different stages of learning process and maturation of child during the course of the experiment. All this you will understand, girls. There is inequality in tests. If you are devising a test, there is a inequality in the test because each one is different. Their intelligence capability is different. So one shot study, it is a disadvantage. Okay, and also I told you it is a poorest model. So the novelty of the experimental treatment would be favorably affect the experimental group here. Since you have only one group, you will not have any innovation. Okay. The last design is static group design. Okay. We will have two groups. Static group comparison you can do. I think I have not given any example for this. 1 minute, girls. I have not given an example. Always I write one example here. We can develop an example here. See, a pre-experimental research design, you don't have any control group, you have only experimental group. For static group design, you can always have two groups, class A, class B. Okay, you can have treatment. Give them some calculus lecture through blended learning or something and try to analyze, give them a test, post-test. For group A and group B, you see calculate the mean and find out whether group A is doing better than group B. That's it. It is
Ma'am,
yeah.
Same treatment or different, ma'am?
It should be same treatment. Only then you can compare. Only then you can compare. You should give same treatment. That's why I put a treatment in the middle. See, you cannot give calculus to them, you cannot give biology to them and compare giving a post test, different post tests. You cannot compare their how they perform, right? So the treatment should be the same. Got me? So static group design, treatment should be the same for two groups and try to compare. That is why it is called a static group comparison. Got me? Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Next is true experimental research design. Anybody who is going for PhD, think about these designs only. My humble request for you. All the people are doing only survey and doing PhD. Okay, please don't repeat. In the med itself, I think you were forced to do some topics. I know that. Why we do that is because since you are jumping into a new field, we force you to give some variables so that you know what really research is. But try to do true experimental research design if you are going for higher education. Okay, so the first design is pre-test, post-test with control. So you will have an experimental group, you will have a control group, You will give pre-test for both the experimental and the control groups, and you will give treatment for the experimental group, and you will not give treatment for the control group. And again, you will give a test, post test. Here also you will give post test, and you will try to find the effect of treatment between the experimental group and control group. This is what is called as pre-test, post-test with control. So you have class A, experimental group, you give treatment, teaching methodology, blended learning, you give post-test. Here, you don't give blended learning, just give them a lecture and try to give a test for them. Compare the test scores of, you can compare pre-test scores, you can compare the post-test scores. You can compare the pre-test and post-test scores of the experimental group. You can compare the pre-test and post-test of the control group. Okay, just a minute. Next is true experimental research design. You can do manipulation, you can control, you can do a randomization, you can also do random assignment also. I think you are taking screenshots also, and you can read it afterwards. Girls?
Yes,
Next,
ma'am, we are taking.
post is only with control. I'm going to post all this provided I get time also, girls. I am held up with so many things. With all other work, I am trying to be with you because I know the seriousness of research. That is why. Okay. So post test only with control. In true experimental research design, the second design is post test only with control. 1 minute, girls. So post test only with control. From the name itself, you will understand, girls. You have experimental group, control group. Example give by yourself. It is not that you have to read the book and take an example. Once you understand the design, it is possible for you to understand. You design your own test. So you have control group and you give treatment and try to give post test. That is post test only with control. You compare experimental group post test and the control group post test. That is post test only with control. Got me? So 1 minute. Solomon 4 group design. It is the very important design and everybody likes it and everybody wants to do it. Only thing, they do not know how to go about with it because they are not able to understand what is Solomon 4 group design. You have 4 groups: experimental group 1, experimental group 2, control group 1, control group 2. You have for experimental group, one group you give pre-test, for other group you don't give pre-test. In the control group also, for one group you give pre-test, for other group you don't give pre-test. And for the experimental groups, you try to give treatment. For control groups, you don't give treatment. So for all the groups, you have to give post-test. Okay, that is the condition. So you try to find the effect of, you try to compare pre-test with post-test, pre-test with the, like this you can cross. Okay, when you don't give pre-test, what is the effect of treatment after giving the post-test? It is like that. So you can do multiple comparisons with this design. This is called a Solomon 4 group design. Okay, so you have 2 experimental groups, 2 control groups. 2 experimental groups, you have pre-test and no pre-test. Here you give pre-test and no pre-test for the control group also. Experimental groups, you give treatment, there is no treatment. But post-test for all of them you have to give, and you have to find the effect. That is called as Solomon 4 group design. It's very difficult, girls, practically speaking. When you have a strong hold with the students only, you will be able to do. Okay. So I do not know the slide has ended. Yeah, I have completed, girls. I think I have maximized my time to 14 minutes. If I'm not 1 minute, girls.